So we have been talking about a initial public offering for Chia Network Incorporated since, I don't know, since I guess Chia went mainnet back in 2021. And since we are on the recent anniversary of Chia, and we've had some members of the community who have dug through the S1 filings. Maybe it's a good time to ask the question, when is CNI going to IPO? And Rusty, you actually asked a really good question that I thought might be a good place to start. So you have some confusion about like what it even means to IPO, right? You wanna ask your question one more time, and we'll start there.
Yeah. I was trying to look up on the internet, trying to get some idea on what's going on with the subject because I'm not too knowledgeable on what goes on with IPOs, and especially blockchains and cryptocurrencies. But it was my understanding that an IPO is when a company or like a larger established private company allows it to go public and allows people to buy into it. But I was thinking, Chia is already a public blockchain. I mean, I could go on and buy Chia myself right now. What I was just confused on what they're trying to sell. Are they selling Chia? Is there like a special amount of Chia that's locked up in a special wallet that is now going to be open just for the special IPO? Is it going to be at a certain price, a different price than what you can buy off of the actual exchanges? I'm just, I definitely looking forward to this episode so I can learn more.
So there's two things involved here. You have the Chia peer-to-peer public blockchain, and this is actually an appropriate thing to talk about because it ties in with what has actually been responded to by the SEC. So you have the company and you have the blockchain. So Chia Network Incorporated is a private company. It is a company which has received investment. It took on a bunch of VC money. It went through various rounds and they hired a bunch of people and they have a business model and they have called themselves the red hat of the world of crypto. So if there was a enterprise company and they wanted to use a public blockchain, they would then have a company that would stand behind the public blockchain, would help them implement their project, just basically be the support organization that shepherded into existence various use cases of using public blockchain and would provide enterprise support for big corporation governments, banks, whatever that wanted to use that public blockchain. And that public blockchain that they have specialized in, that they're going to provide these consultative services on, is Chia. So Chia is already public. It's a blockchain which has thousands of people who are participating in the consensus model. They're being awarded XCH. This is a decentralized public blockchain, and so that XCH token is widely available. And you're right, you can just go buy it. There are various exchanges that support it and whatever. The thing that you can't do right now is you can't go on to the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange and buy shares in Chia Network Incorporated, that business entity that exists, that wants to support the public blockchain that took on this investment. And this is the thing that we're talking about today is when will you be able to buy shares in that private company through a public offering on the stock market? And that's what we're going to talk about in a bit more detail here, because we had a member of the Chia community who went through an exhaustive look through Chia's S1 filing and the exchange that has happened between Chia Network Incorporated and the SEC, and really where are we at in that whole IPO process. Does that seem like a good summary, Lucas? What are your other thoughts there?
Um, that's a great summary. I guess maybe to add a little bit more context, part of why we get confused in the world of crypto was the whole ICO concept that happened for some while, and this notion that the base layer currency was going to be what people invested in, and that led to, shall we say, the SEC wars that have lately sort of come to a draw and come to maybe a new era in regulation.
And are there any precedences for this on other blockchains? I thought that I looked around. This was more of like I was saying, the things that companies do. Is this things that a lot of blockchains have done, or is this something that you think more blockchains will do in the future now that Chia can set a standard for it?
Now that the SEC is beginning to open up uh, to accept, now that crypto is becoming something that's more acceptable, I would imagine that we see more companies and more blockchains or companies that are creating blockchains take the IPO route, because that is according to acceptable practices. As to whether anyone else is doing it, I would say this is why Cardano also looks interesting. I don't know if Cardano has made an IPO, but they have also.
Well, I don't think that there is a Cardano company that is an equivalent of CNI.
What about IOHK? Because I thought they took more of a like the educational nonprofit route.
That
Uh,
I think so. Like this seems fairly novel. The only thing that really comes to mind that is equivalent to what Chia is doing in some sense of that there's a company and a blockchain that are somewhat intimately tied together would be Ripple. I think that that's the only thing I can really think of because if you think about Cardano and even Ethereum, they've gone the way of, well, we have a foundation or we have some sort of a, centralized entity that it has some altruistic notions. Chia has always said that it exists as a business entity to make money. I don't think they in any way were trying to say we're some altruistic organization.
well, I think they said the blockchain was altruistic and they were going to support the blockchain and also support enterprises.
But that they're a for-profit company, that's the distinction.
Yes,
Whether
agreed.
they have some, grandiose messages of altruism like Google used to have, don't be evil, whatever, but they're a profit-driven organization that wants to exist by creating profits and being a profitable business.
Yes. But I think it's just important to note the distinction between the public blockchain as opposed to Ripple's private blockchain.
Well,
Um,
Ripple's not a private blockchain. What do you mean? It's not private in the sense that like you have like a private blockchain in the sense that it's gated behind some infrastructure that is only known to known participants and it isn't widely distributed or traded. I mean, I don't think you could say Ripple it meets
I
the.
guess I guess when I say that, it's because of the consensus mechanism that is a proof of stake mechanism.
Yeah, but I
So
mean, those are just equally distasteful, and they're all like kind of similar in that sense.
okay,
It's definitely a public ledger. I don't think you could call it a private blockchain, but
I feels a lot more private. But
okay. Well, we're probably splitting hairs on that, but anyway, that's the only thing that really like immediately comes to mind. I think that there are other entities that maybe are out there. They're probably more fringe players. I know Kwai Network is probably somewhat similar to that, and I think that there's a commercial entity that exists that's trying to usher Kwai into existence. There's probably a variety of different Cosmos ones that exist, but regardless, I think we could get bogged down in trying to find other examples. But like I think there are some. It, likely, Chia is one of few that are pursuing this path of compliance. Even if they do exist, those companies probably aren't quite trying to play this game. And I think Chio is largely playing this game because under the old rules and under the old regime, Chia Network Incorporated had a strong case for it not being a security and doing something in a compliant way. But with how the SEC seems to have changed its ideas around what they even want to pursue and things that they think are worth enforcing, it doesn't seem like that's as strong of a way to play this game anymore.
well, we hope or we wonder. But
Okay, well, getting into the meat of this. So I thought that this point was extremely important about why Chia hasn't IPO'd yet and what is the gate for IPOing. Normally, when you have an IPO, it's because you've taken some private investment, you've existed for some period of time, and you're ready to go public because the investors who originally put the money in, who have shepherded the company through its early phases, now want to be able to sell off some of that equity, get their money back so that they can go do another round of it and reduce their exposure, but also continue to be in the game. And usually that's after the company has done a variety of things, launched a successful product, found product market fit, achieved some level of profits. These are usually the kinds of things that the street demands. It will look at your company and it will say, either you're losing money hand over fist, but we see on the horizon exactly where you're going. I think Amazon would be a good example of this. Amazon continuously lost money, and they said this was their strategy because they were investing, because they were building, because they were growing, and profits didn't matter because profits would come. They could see how what they were doing with their investments, that if they were to tamper it down or if they were to restructure their business towards trying to actually make money, that there was an obvious way that they could turn it around and that they could become profitable if they decided to change gears from growth to profitability. I don't think Chia has achieved that level. Like, even if it were to go public, it's not obvious how they would turn the lever and say, well, we're going to stop doing this and we're just going to start making money. What it looks like to me, and the way that I read through this, is that Chia has been looking for a way to profitability. And we've seen some moves last year with the investment into Berkeley Compute, later to be called Silicon, and now with the move towards Permuto and whatever the follow-on product is that they think they've come up with after Permuto, this is CNI attempting to find revenue streams, because the major products that they've been able to launch on top of the Chia blockchain thus far, like the Climate Action Data Trust, are not sufficient to pay for their continued operations. And when they tried to raise money last year and they were unable to raise money, that's when we started to see them selling off the pre-farm with regularity. So that's kind of my take on the section that Slow has put together here about profitability, is that Chia really hasn't achieved that yet. They're still continuously losing money. And then when they failed to raise last year, that's what prompted them to be more active in selling the pre-farm. And they were emboldened to do that because of all the things that had happened within the SEC saying, here's our position on all this token business. And since Chia is sufficiently decentralized and they felt like they had a strong case that XCH was a commodity, now they could start selling off that pre-farm to continue to fund their operations.
I think it's good to bring up Amazon. Also, Google comes to mind when I think about companies that have IPO'd without achieving profitability. And I think that part of the niche that CNI was looking to fill with their IPO was one that was on the breaking wave of what would be big in the technology sector. And that seemed to be coming out of 2020. Like blockchain and crypto were going to be a place of a lot of speculation, a lot of growth, a lot of interest in the world looking at technology solutions. But then that got eclipsed for a little while with AI. It still seems that there is some vacillation in the interest between AI and crypto, but which could also have been part of CNI's interest in Berkeley Compute and GPU whatever AI association with some of the generation of AI. So I don't know. I think it's when we ask when IPO, though, part of the answer that is crucial in answering that, or part of the equation that's crucial to answer that, is there interest in crypto right now? With the pivot in the administration and the SEC with their attitudes towards crypto, that's part of it. Now we need to see a broader interest in tokenization of real world assets. So I like what Permuto does. I hope that we see more of that. But
Well, when it comes to is there an interest in crypto, I think that there's definitely an interest in Bitcoin. We have seen this, and we have talked about it a lot on various different episodes that we've done, and shows where we've covered various companies, countries, states interest in Bitcoin. That is 100% happening. When we take the digital gold store of value, can you have a strategic asset which is not relatively non-inflationary, and say, is that of interest to the world? It clearly is. So what else can you do? What else is there? If Bitcoin isn't going to be the network that allows for these very interesting use cases of what you can do with the technology as a whole, which I think a lot of people would still prefer that Bitcoin be the thing, but it's fairly obvious that that's not going to happen in the short term. So is there an opportunity for a player like Chia to step into that world and say, we're going to be the rails on which all of these interesting use cases can be built? I think that there's a compelling story there that Chia could be that, but have they the applications? Is there the other companies that want to build on top of it and use that as the rails? I think that there was a compelling story when Chia was green. It was super decentralized, that there was a lot of interest, that there were hundreds of thousands of validator nodes all across the entire planet. But as the net spaces continued to erode, as the GPUs came into the mix and the green narrative wasn't necessarily there, it became less obvious that this was going to be like the next big chain, and the applications didn't come. The companies didn't launch onto Chia. Like, where is the big use case that we've seen launch onto Chia that actually makes this railroad infrastructure be a compelling story? Permuto is destined, or is looking like it could be that use case on top of it. But in all the years that she has been out, like, that would be the first one, besides maybe Solomon's Lot. I mean, what else is there? I really can't think of any other big project that's out there, a big company that's running on those rails. I know that they've investigated it, but Climate Action Data Trust is really the only one in it, and it hasn't produced enough revenue for Chia to be a compelling use case to allow them to IPO.
well, there's also these broader fights that have needed to be put to bed, and that was a Bitcoin gave many people in the world a new interest in finance and in money, and a way to begin to understand them in greater depth. But part of what CNI and Chia, the ideas behind them were to get away from this store of value. And I don't mean to. I know that Chia is the green Bitcoin, but Chia, part of the understanding there was that the ledger, the the value was in the rails. You just said rails, payment rails. Even the model, when we go back and look at CNI is a red hat company. They're thinking about Linux. Linux isn't valuable because it's a complex, you know a complex amount of code that can run a machine. It's valuable because of the things that you can do with those machines. Chia wanted to be a decentralized communication, so decentralized secure communication, and that to me is a is another wave in understanding how money works, how banking works, and I think it's the right step to make, but you also have to wait for people and businesses, countries to make these realizations, or to reach these realizations. So I think that we get closer to it. Uh, I think we're at the brink of it now. So because anyway. Should we talk about whether XCH is a security or commodity? Because I could go on forever about money versus store of value versus money as communication.
I mean, I think it's worth saying maybe I have like at least one more comment on that. The idea that we could have rails, that we could have something that we could build on, or a railroad, I think is a very compelling use case for blockchain. Having built multiple different real world use cases on top of blockchains, the need is there. It exists for this idea of a distributed public database that's immutable. Like those properties enable things that just are not possible if those rails don't exist. Anywhere you need some sort of a distributed trust mechanism, that works really well. Any place you need a distributed public database, it works really well. So having something like this is very needed in the world, and we really do not have any equivalent to Chia. I can't tell you how many times I've been approached on various projects and have to contemplate using something other than Chia. It You quickly start to realize how novel that kind of an idea really is, and it really hasn't been replicated in a substantive way. So even though I say that need is there and I see the use cases, we just haven't seen a use case that launched, that stayed on the chain, that was sustainable, that actually drove revenue to CNI. That I think is really what we're lasering in on here. And I think that's why we've seen CNI put some of their treasure into various companies to try to launch them itself. Like it's seeing that this mechanism is useful, that it does enable very interesting things, but that these companies need funding to get going. They have to get jump started. And there's been little appetite from the broader ecosystem to invest in this chain particularly. I've definitely seen it. I've felt it as I went out and tried to raise money for various different projects, that when it came up that we were using Chia, that there was resistance to funding a company that wanted to launch on top of that, because there were other chains that were throwing more money around, that had more money to, you know, build the ecosystem, seed the ecosystem with money for projects, for, you know, whatever it is that was needed to happen, that money was getting thrown around. And whether that money was raised inappropriately through an ICO or some other type of activity that was dubious or illegal, regardless, they still had money, and that's where the VCs wanted to see things go. And it does tie into this whole idea of whether XCH is a security or a commodity, because on these other chains, they use their tokens in this fashion. They used it to start projects and to, you know, liquidize an ecosystem that they wanted to see exist using their blockchain, where Chia was reluctant to do that at first. Very early on, like I'd say within the first 2 years, Chia was very reluctant to fund activities out of any kind of a pre-farm. And that only changed when this whole conversation around whether you could sell any of the pre-farm and whether that would violate securities law, and whether, you know, XCH was a security or a commodity, that the folks at CNI and their counsel thought that they had sufficiently answered that question. And I think in this exchange where we see CNI talking to the SEC, and the SEC is, I don't know what acknowledge particularly means in this case, because if you read through the details of this, it acknowledges their response and their position. If that means we've accepted your argument that it is a commodity and that we don't intend to, you know, say much more on the matter, but we reserve the right to comment, that feels like what the exchange is here. And that once that idea had been firmly established in the mind of CNI that it was not a security, that they were then emboldened to start selling it and to using it to fund various activities in the ecosystem, like funding Berkeley Compute and funding Permuto.
You know, I read this and yes, they reserve the right to consider your responses and may have further comments. I just I applaud CNI for trying to work with the SEC, but I wonder what expectations are real with regards to any finality from a determination from the SEC. So but seems like they've played that game successfully in approaching the SEC and having conversations about what the government would like to see with regards to a company that's backing a blockchain. It's going, not to go back, but I can't resist after your comments. It's also interesting to think about the narrative of the green Bitcoin and this concept that so many people had of a crypto. Crypto is a store of value, crypto is digital gold, and that there could be some greener gold. So in some way, maybe the GPU grinding, getting away from that green narrative, has been good for Chia, good for CNI, and getting away from this what I see as a as a restraint. If you're just thinking of XCH as a valuable security, as gold, um, then you're not looking at all the possibilities of what could be recorded on the ledger. So it seems like we've gotten past that, and that the world is ready. The world is ready to begin to tokenize assets on a public ledger. So um, hopefully we will see either broader interest in these ideas, or a product that starts making money, because when IPO, I think, is a correct question as to what is next in the roadmap for CNI and for Chia.
In that Red Hat model that was discussed, it is really predicated on that there being this sea change, that there was a massive shift, and that massive shift was going to be captured by Red Hat when the world woke up and said, instead of using Windows as the backbone for running the entire internet, use a free open source operating system that reduces costs and allows you to do things fundamentally better and cheaper. That whole idea that there was a massive shift, that there were lots of companies that were going to need it, is what enabled that Red Hat model on top of the public infrastructure or the public code base, the open source Linux operating system. That I don't think has played out in the way that CNI wanted it to. You had to have a lot of companies that would essentially be banging on the door of Chia Network Incorporated and saying, we need your help us, we want to pay you, we want to get our project live, we have money, help us, and we'll pay you to help us. That has not occurred. What has happened in the world of blockchains is it's so easy to launch a blockchain that there are legion blockchains, and every single one of them maybe comes with its own promise, with its own set of companies and VCs that are backing it. And there isn't this idea that there's going to be a single chain, and CNI, because they've built the chain and open sourced it and have all this expertise, are then in a position to capitalize on that. So I think what it's looking like now is, instead of there being companies that want to do this and that they're going to bang on the door for CNI, CNI has now taken a different route, which is they're going to manufacture some companies that are going to exist, and they're going to do that through treasure that they have in the pre-farm to fund this type of businesses that are being launched, and that those companies will then be using up the blockchain, and that will drive revenue back to Chia. And if that's what we need to wait to have happen before it can IPO, then I'm going to make the prediction that this is not the year of Chia's IPO. It can't even happen in 2025, because if we were to see what the conditions are that are required for Chia to IPO, to have sufficient revenue, and if that revenue is mostly going to come from Permuto and Berkeley being the companies that will drive revenue back into CNI, those companies are not at a profitable stage themselves. So if they're going to drive profits into CNI, and then CNI is going to IPO off of the proceeds from those, then we're looking at 2026, 2027 the earliest. I mean, that's my thought.
Well, that's probably reasonable, unless there's some great wave of interest more broadly that happens that drives an earlier IPO. But it does seem that that CNI is in the position of being able to, or has gotten close to the position of having all the approval lined up, so they can wait for the timing on the announcement of or the launch of their IPO. Was there other were there other notes in this article that, pardon me, um, that that you wanted to talk about before we close out? There was the black swans. I think um,
I think these are interesting. I'm not sure that they definitely delayed things. I don't think in any way that losing their banker, Credit Suisse, like these things certainly caused trouble. I don't think that they would have significantly quickened the pace at which Chia could have IPO'd. Even if none of these events would have occurred, I don't think the profitability was there. So I don't think they could have gone IPO earlier, even if they had wanted to. The fact that they have pretty much continuously used the money that they raised to try to drive towards profitability but never achieved it. I I mean, if they would have IPO'd without any kind of revenue or profits, they would have had to have had that situation that I described for Amazon, which is there is a clear path towards how you could do it, and the street might accept that. But if all you're doing is burning cash and building, and there is no path to customers or revenue, I don't think that they would have been able to IPO even sans these black swan events. I just don't I don't think that that would have occurred.
well, I think that it's a we can't ignore the black swan events that occur, and also their closeness to CNI with Credit Suisse, and SVB, and the FTX collapse just more broadly was part of what really stalled out interest in crypto for some time. So
But if they hadn't happened, right? Let's just say that none of these things occurred. If we were to look at what year could they have IPO'd, it's like clearly they wouldn't have IPO'd in 2021. Like that was an unrealistic time frame if they wanted to interact with the SEC and get their responses. So if you just take the SEC responses and sort of look at what timeline would have been required, I think 2022 would have been the earliest possible, in 2023 maybe. And if you look at what kind of profitability they had in any of those years and the relevant customer pipeline, I'm not sure that that actually could have been achieved in either of those years, given the products that were on the table or the timeline that they were looking at. I mean, even if they had gotten the best possible response from the SEC, if they had then tried to go out to the street, I think they still would have hit the same wall that they hit when they actually needed to find revenue and they made the investment in Berkeley Compute.
well, I look at the black swan events, and I also see a divergence in there seemed to be more interest in CBDCs, and I had an expectation that we were going to see some sort of central bank customers that were using the Chia blockchain for the launch of CBDCs. But now we've seen a big shift there, and instead uh, we see states talking about stable coins instead. So something that but also the stable coins that they're using look more like a tether with a reserve stable coin that's on a bunch of blockchains. Um, I think I I think I'd rather see decentralized central bank currencies. Um, and Chia has some of the answers there, but maybe that comes back to us in the future. So I don't have anything else more to add. No, I don't have any other comments on CNI's IPO. I did see that Gene Hoffman, CEO of CNI, tweeted yesterday. What did he tweet? When it happens, it happens. I don't know. There's something that seemed ominous. Oh, and then it happens, and then it happens. So maybe CNI has gotten some good news with regards to customers or profitability or getting a step closer to that IPO?
And well, I'm excited. I can't wait to hear what that's going to be. I think the things that are required for the IPO are structural, and they're going to take time for them to develop. We Permuto's not even launched and making money. So, and then we're just hearing Silicon getting ready to launch their own stuff, and here we are at the end of Q1. So it it takes time for these things to occur. Even if Permuto comes out with an absolute slam dunk, it gets all the approvals and whatever that it needs, and they go and round up all the money that they've got to round up, and they get these stocks launched and they're trading and they've got the customers on and it's using up block space. That's going to take some time. It's not going to happen overnight. So even if they're in an all hands on deck, they're building furiously, they've hired most of the Chia community that are now working at CNI to help get this thing to fruition. It's still summer before we're going to see that happening in a substantial way. And you're always going to lag a couple quarters to actually see those revenues start to plow in. So I just can't imagine that there was any sea change event that can occur that would accelerate any of those structural things sooner than 2026. So maybe we'll just leave it at that. I'm gonna give a bold prediction that 2025 is not the year of IPO, where we will not see a CNI IPO in 2025.
Sounds good. I will shy away from predictions. I'll keep mine to March Madness. Talk to you tomorrow.
All right, we'll see you tomorrow.